Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samuetti. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle, and we're once again very fortunate to be joined by a regular guest on the Gaggle, military analyst, intelligence, former intelligence official, Scott Ritter. So welcome, Scott. Since we last spoke, maybe a couple of months ago, there have been a number of developments, and obviously it'd be very good to get your take. In the last few days, we had obviously the embarrassing and painful episode of some 90 Russian servicemen being killed. According to the Russian Ministry of Defense, the cause was that they were using their cell phones, which of course gave away their location, and that was the reason for their targeting. But however, that may not be militarily significant. I mean, it's obviously painful and embarrassing for the Russian government, but militarily it may not be significant. So what's your take about what's going on and what the future prospects look like?
And maybe, to kind of bookend it, peak Zelensky appearing in front of Congress. I think those two are the biggest events that we have seen since we last spoke.
Well, let me start then. My brain works chronologically, so I'll start with Zelensky because I think it's a good setup for this. Why did Zelensky go to Congress? It's a key question. Was it to deliver, as Nancy Pelosi said, the greatest speech in the history of Congress? The greatest speech. I mean, we've never seen anything like the Zelensky speech, except today nobody can remember a single word that he said because it was totally irrelevant. It mattered not. In fact, it's a speech I think he'd rather forget because it exposed the fact that Zelensky is purely a figurehead. He's a toy. He's a chess piece being moved on a board. Zelensky went to Washington as political cover for a vote being carried out by a lame duck session of Congress. For I think between was it 43 or 63 billion? It doesn't matter. You get up to that number, it's a few billion here or there, but it's a lot of money to be allocated for Ukraine. Money that may not have been passed so freely and willingly or without question by the new Congress that had emerged from this, although the Republicans seem to be having a heck of a time appointing a speaker, but that's a different issue altogether. But Zelensky was brought in purely for political cover. But sometimes the actors forget their roles and they think they're actually players. And Zelensky came in, I think, under the misguided perception that because he got to meet with Joe Biden in a made-for-Hollywood moment in the White House where he got to hand him a medal that was given to him from a hero of Bakhmut, whom Zelensky met with the day before he got on a U.S. Air Force plane to fly to Washington, D.C., or to hand a flag to Nancy Pelosi signed by the heroes of Bakhmut. He thought maybe, gosh, I am somebody. And instead of just Pinocchio, the wooden boy being manipulated, he thought he was actually a real boy. No, Zelensky, you're not a real boy. You're just a little puppet. And here's the proof. You see, prior to Zelensky's trip, there was a meeting held by The Economist where General Zaluzhny, the commander of the Ukrainian armed forces, was front and center. I think present at the meeting was Zelensky, who didn't say a word, which speaks volumes. And Zaluzhny was asked, what his feeling was on the battlefield. He said, I can beat these guys being the Russians. Well, Zaluzhny, you can't because you haven't and you're not going to, but it's all right. You're allowed to think what you want. I can beat these guys. But to do it, he said, I need 300 tanks, 500 armored fighting vehicles, 500 artillery pieces, and unlimited ammunition. I mean, it is literally a scene from the movie of Downfall with Adolf Hitler down in the bunker looking at a map. Where's Vink? Where's Steiner? If the Ninth Army only did this, they'd do this, we'd win the war. Well, the armies don't exist, Hitler. And guess what, Zaluzhny? The armies don't exist. The equipment isn't coming. You're not going to get it. And he knows it. He said so. He said, if you don't give me the stuff, then I ain't going to win. I'm going to lose because the Russians are actually pretty good. And they're building up a lot of forces that are going to be able to fight, and we don't have anything to stop them. So that's the mindset that Zelensky's coming into. I can't stop. And then meanwhile, the Russians are pounding the living dog doo-doo out of the Ukrainian infrastructure with missiles that supposedly aren't supposed to exist, drones that apparently get shot down at 110% success rate, but still somehow manage to fall on the target they intended to strike. $1 trillion in infrastructure damage has been done to Ukraine, much of it more recently through these strikes on their electrical generation capacity and others. The Ukrainian society is shutting down, and that's the other reality. So Zelensky wants air defense, and he needs magical armies to appear. So he comes to Washington, D.C., and he's supposed to just play a script, show up, hand the medal, hand the flag, give the greatest speech in the history of Congress, and then leave. Gosh, but he tries to ask for more. He wants not one Patriot missile battery, but 2. He wants tanks. He wants this. And he was told, no, you're not going to get it. And that says a whole bunch right there. It says that the West isn't trying to win this war. The West has given up on winning this war. The West simply wants to do what Lindsey Graham has, articulated in one of his only honest moments, have Ukraine fight to the last Ukrainian. Yeah. And that's the sad fate of Ukraine right now. So now we come to the current situation. Russia's in the midst of finalizing its...
Well, Scott, if I could just finish up with the Zelensky visit before we move forward. I agree with your analysis. I think it was also just to continue the grift while they had it, because we had the unprecedented boondoggle bill passed in the lame duck Congress, which it satisfied the defense industries, the Pentagon, and the Ukraine coalition, if we want to call that. But I mean, if you're right, and I think you are, you have a good road record here. Are they setting Zelensky up as the fall guy? We did everything we could. We did.
There's no doubt about it. I mean, I can't pretend to be an expert on Ukrainian politics. Like everybody, I watched from a distance. The election between Poroshenko and Zelensky. I was confused about the relationship between democracy and oligarchs, and how that worked. But I shouldn't, because I'm an American and money dominates American politics. So it just dominates Ukrainian politics in a different manner.
No, in the U.S., there's lobbying. There's corruption in Ukraine. Okay.
There is corruption in Ukraine. But, since the war, I've been watching as Zelensky has, because, a lot of people don't realize, while he may have won the election in 2019, I believe it was, with 78% of the support, by the time the war broke out, some polls say his support rating was 23% and dropping. He had shut down all opposition. He'd become a virtual dictator. He was confused. He had bad policies. So this war comes along, and this horribly unpopular man is now what, Winston Churchill? But he's only Churchill because we invented him. Zelensky didn't invent himself. His famous quote, "I don't need a ride, I need ammunition." He never said it. It was written by a CIA operative in the U.S. Embassy, and the U.S. Embassy has admitted it. They come right out and said, "Nah, he didn't say that."
Well, one of his claim to fame is he has a peculiar way of playing the piano. I don't want to say anything more. Okay.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, look, it's a talent. But we'll leave it at that. The fact is, though, this is a man who has been propped up by the West, and who's only he's not a military genius. He's not a military tactician. He's not a leader. He's not an able politician. His speeches are written by others. Everything he does, he's a puppet. And his sole purpose for existing has been to serve as the focal point for the creation of a myth worthy of Western support. And so that's his job. But we've seen since late summer, early fall, this trend, at least I've been tracking this trend in the Western media, where they're starting to put the focus on the defense minister in Ukraine There was a great, not a great, but it was a big story in the New Yorker magazine that seemed to have the stamp of approval from the National Security Advisor, because a lot of people were talking about a lot of highly classified things that normally would get you put in jail for discussing openly in the media. But there it was, and it seemed to start to de-emphasize the Zelensky effect and start to talk about the Ministry of Defense. And now Zaluzhny is emerging as a competitor. And Klitschko, the mayor of Kiev, is starting to emerge. The wolves are starting to circle the corpse that is Zelensky. And I do believe he is being set up as the fall guy. So, and one of the purposes of this trip was for the United States to say, we did everything possible. We gave him all the support. It's not our fault that these bad things are happening to the Ukrainians.
But with a view to what? I mean, I've heard these arguments, oh, DM, they're going to do him to DM. But the reason they got rid of DM was they didn't think DM wanted to go on fighting. They thought DM was going to do some kind of an agreement with Ho Chi Minh. And the Americans didn't want that. The Americans wanted to take over the war, which is what happened. Once the DM was out, the Americans took over the war. So, if they do push Zelensky out, that would be with a view to what? I mean, what would be the American goal in getting rid of Zelensky?
American goal in getting rid of Zelensky is to bring this war to a rapid closure.
Why would the Americans want to do that? That would be a change in policy, because the Americans think war is going pretty well. I mean, it's
no, they don't.
Relatively inexpensive for the Americans, not for the Europeans, but for the Americans, it's relatively expensive, and it's painful for the Russians. Why would the Americans want to bring it to an end?
Nobody in America wants this war to continue, because some things are about to happen. Russia's about to go on the offensive, and this is what we're going to get into when we talked about the 96 dead, probably more once they pull all the bodies out. In School 19. Let's focus on some realities. Let's just be clear right now. If Biden wanted Zelensky to win, he'd have sent not 2 Patriot batteries, but 5 Patriot batteries, and they would have been sent months ago if we wanted Zelensky to win. If Biden wanted Zelensky to win, we'd be twisting the arm of Germany to provide Leopard tanks. There would be tens of thousands of Ukrainian forces at Grafenwohr right now in Germany being trained on advanced armored fighting techniques using the most advanced NATO equipment possible to get them on the battlefield to engage the Russians decisively if we wanted them to win. We tried that. And yeah, it succeeded in Kharkov being recaptured. It succeeded in the right bank of Kherson, Kherson being recaptured. But that's it. Now they're all dead. Now all the equipment's gone. As Zaluzhny said, I need 300 tanks. I need 500 armored fighting vehicles. I need 500 artillery pieces. Why do you need those? We already gave them to you. Oh, everything we gave you is gone. You blew it. You had your little Pyrrhic victory. You got to have a headline for a day. Zelensky got to walk through Izium and go, hey, I'm the liberator of Izium. He got to take a selfie in Kherson. Well, I'm here to tell you right now that Izium and Kherson are going to belong to Russia in the not so distant future. Why? It's simple military math. It's called burn rate and replenishment rate. The Ukrainian burn rate is unreal. They are burning through manpower and equipment at unsustainable rates. Bakhmut has been called the meat grinder for a reason. Ukrainian forces are going in there. They're suffering 80-90% casualties before being rotated out with a new unit coming in. Now, that doesn't mean the Russians aren't suffering casualties. They are, but not on a level. The burn rate for the Ukrainians is gigantic. The burn rate for Russia, not so much. The replenishment rate, because if you have a large burn rate, you need an even larger replenishment rate. But the Ukrainian replenishment rate is smaller than their burn rate, meaning they're burning through men and equipment at a rate more accelerated than what can be replaced. If your burn rate is say 800 men a day, and you in 10 days you lose 8,000. That's 10 days. And if NATO says we can train 8,000 troops in 3 months, George, I'm not a mathematician, but I'll tell you right now, that's an equation that will never balance out. And that's the fact. NATO can't train Ukrainian troops quick enough to replace the casualties on the battlefield. And NATO has already shown in the United States, demonstrated that they don't have the equipment, or they're unwilling to give the equipment to Ukrainians to replace that which has been destroyed. Meanwhile, Russia still hasn't finished its mobilization of 300,000. The final 125, 150,000 or so are finishing the final touches on their combat preparations, where they have been organized into combat units. You know, the reservists that made their way, these were battlefield replacements. They went in, they beefed up the defensive lines, they've solidified, and look at the stability all along on the line right now. There's no major Ukrainian breakthroughs. The Ukrainians are beating their head against a brick wall. The Russians are stabilized.
Let me interrupt you here for a second. First of all, for our viewers, Scott froze up there a little bit, but the audio was fine, as you just noticed there. Okay, let's talk about this offensive. You've talked about this before. Douglas McGregor has talked about it in a very lengthy conversation with Michael Vlahos. I think a lot of our viewers saw that. It was quite interesting in many ways. I tend to agree with you. I mean, living here, that there's talk about the upcoming offensive, nothing specific. There's no leakage out of the Kremlin, I can guarantee you that. They don't have problems with leaks. But if and when, and I think it's more when anything, a major offensive start, and Ukraine begins to crumble and crumble quickly, can NATO survive that? I mean, they put in so much. I mean, because the way I've looked at this and tried to frame it over the last few months, maybe the last 6 months, is that I really buy into this is NATO against Russia. And when there is a termination of hostilities, NATO loses, not Ukraine, NATO. And I think this has been part of the Russian plan. I mean, it explains how Russia has been fighting this conflict. But what do you think NATO's response is going to be? I mean, they're all in on this, okay? And from a propaganda point of view, in the U.S. as well, I understand what George's concerns are here. But let's talk about this offensive and its implications, because this will be, the way I look at it, a complete, utter, humiliating defeat for NATO.
Well, it's going to be, but one of the things we can say about the Russians is, I mean, there's an old saying, and I might be getting it wrong, but the Russian is slow to harness but quick to ride. It takes a while for the Russians to get into the harness, to get settled in, etc. And that's pretty much been this war. Allow me for a second just to back up and frame, from my perspective, this war. When February 24th occurred, I think we were all not taken aback, but this was something that it was new.
Numb. We were all numb.
And everybody's just going, wow, boom. And some immediate narratives came out. And one of the narratives was that this was a precipitous, unprovoked war of aggression on the part of Russia. And that this was about Russia seeking to dramatically resolve the Ukrainian problem once and for all, decisively, etc. But we now know a couple things. Let me just, again, give me a moment, because this is important. This is really important. We knew, but we didn't know how to put it in proper perspective, about William Burns' memorandum in early 2008, Niet means Niet, where William Burns said, hey, this idea of bringing Ukraine into NATO is a red line, and if it's crossed, it will probably lead to Russian military intervention in Ukraine. I mean, we knew that. So we knew cause and effect right off from the start. When the U.S. ambassador writes a memorandum like this, you can't say we didn't know. We knew that if we invited Ukraine in to NATO, we were crossing a red line that eventually would lead to a Russian military intervention in Ukraine. We knew that, and yet we invited Ukraine in that November. So right off the bat, you have to understand that we were seeking a military confrontation in Ukraine with Russia from the very beginning, even pre-2014. Now we come to 2014. All right, the coup. Well, I view it as a coup. People can view it any way they want. Bottom line is, the constitutionally elected government of Yanukovych is out, and this new revolutionary nationalistic government is in. And a fighting breaks out in Donbass. In August of 2014, the fighting was not going well for the Ukrainian army. I think people tend to forget that thousands of them had been surrounded in a village in Donetsk, and now we're facing imminent destruction, death and destruction. It was going to be the end of the Ukrainian army. And so the Ukrainian government begged for a solution. And the Germans and the French came up, formed something called the Normandy format, because remember, we had this anniversary of the Normandy landing, and the Germans and the French and the Russians got together and said, hey, why don't we try and fix what's going on in Donbass? And so through the more Normandy format, they came up with the Minsk Accords. And it was supposed to be about peace, ceasefire, creating stability, so that there could be a peaceful outcome that kept Donbass within the territorial integrity of a sovereign Ukraine. That was the goal of the Minsk Accords, according to Petro Poroshenko, according to Angela Merkel, and according to, well, I'm going to get to that, and according to Hollande, the French president. And Putin bought into it. He said, okay, if this is what you want, this is what we want. We come up to February 24th, and Minsk has collapsed, apparently. But it's Russia's fault. That's what we're told. The Russians are to blame. But for whatever reason, Poroshenko, Merkel, and Hollande have all come out and said, nah, Minsk was always a sham, never to be taken seriously. The sole purpose of Minsk was to buy time so that the Ukrainian military, which was being humiliated on the battlefield in Donetsk at the time of the Minsk Accords, could regroup, be retrained by NATO so that they could solve this problem militarily. The Minsk Accords was promotion of war, the same way that the invitation of Ukraine into NATO was the promotion of war. We know this by the Burns Memorandum. We know this now by the confessions of Poroshenko, Merkel, and Hollande. We know that the West was promoting war. It wasn't just theoretical, because the U.S. built a training facility in Western Ukraine in 2015 that trained 500, or we'll call it a battalion of Ukrainian soldiers every 55 days. Nearly 30,000 Ukrainian soldiers passed through that training facility prior to the conflict in 2022. Guys, this wasn't a precipitous Russian action. This was an act of desperate self-defense by Russia confronting this. And this is so important to recognize, because now that we recognize this, it suddenly puts into perspective. Russia was seeking, bending over backwards, a diplomatic resolution. They were begging for Minsk to be implemented. Putin told Biden, if you want to stop what's going on, and when they met in Geneva, 2021, implement Minsk. Biden promised, but he lied, because they all lied about it. The Russians, in a final act of diplomatic desperation, put forward draft treaties about a new security framework in Europe that would take Ukraine out of NATO, but resolve this. There would be no fighting, and they were turned down. We didn't trade them seriously, but we said it was the Russians being aggressive with diplomacy. No, the Russians were desperate for peace. And here's the final proof of that. They invade Ukraine, but they don't invade Ukraine. The special military operation was not an invasion. If it was an invasion, we wouldn't be talking about it today, because it would have been over. But the Russians went in soft, went in gentle. We couldn't understand why they did it. Why? Because they didn't want to go to war. They didn't want to go to war. They didn't organize for war, politically, militarily, anything. They were forced into this environment to preserve the ethnic Russian population of the Donbass. And how do we know they were looking for peace? Because they sat down in Istanbul willing to sign a peace agreement that said, just the Donbass, just Crimea, Ukraine, stay out of NATO, but everything will be okay. That is a huge step back from what they claimed they wanted in the special military operation, but Russia wasn't seeking to impose its will on anybody. They wanted peace, and they were denied. Were denied by the West, who always wanted war. This isn't about Boris Johnson deciding on the spur of the moment he's going to fly in and shut down the Istanbul Agreement. This is Boris Johnson implementing NATO policy to go to war against Russia. So that's where we are today.
So Russia was,
go ahead, George.
Go ahead. So Russia was naive in 2014 and naive in 2024, because then you could just safely say, yeah, in 2024, they should have done what the Americans would have done in the same circumstances, shock and awe knock Ukraine out right away, just simply by, the overwhelming force. And suddenly, hey, we're facing Russia. We have to sue for peace right away. So the Russians were naive.
Putin acknowledges
Excuse me,
this.
everybody. George said 2024. He meant 2022. Sorry.
Right.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I meant February. It's a shorthand. February.
I don't want you to think that you have a secret earplug from the Kremlin.
February 24. Yeah, of this year. Yes, exactly. That's how I said.
But I do. Remember, I'm a Putin puppet, so I got the secret microphone. No, look, Vladimir Putin has acknowledged that he was naive in 2014.
Yep.
He said, if I were to do it again, I should have finished the mission then. We should have just wiped the Ukrainians out, solved this problem, and moved on. But I believed in peace. I believed Merkel. I believed Hollande. I don't know if he believed the Ukrainians, but he believed the Europeans would get the Ukrainians to do this. And they spent 8 years sacrificing 14,000 lives, by the way, both Ukrainian and ethnic Russians, many of them military, but many of them civilian. But it's 14,000 lives nonetheless that shouldn't have been lost had Putin just finished this problem in 2014. So for all those people that say Vladimir Putin's a steely-eyed killer, hey, no, he's a pussycat. He's a guy who actually believes in peace, looks for peaceful outcomes, looks for peaceful solutions. And he was naive in 2014 to believe these people. And he was naive in 2024 to believe that Ukraine was willing to take the easy way out.
Yeah, but Scott, you raise a very important point and problem. George and I have talked at great length about Hollande, Merkel, Poroshenko. Okay. And my original question to you, I'll rephrase it right now. How has this come to an end? With the caveat, well, there's nobody trustworthy to talk to. Okay. They've shown themselves, they've shown their duplicity, they've shown their lies. Okay. And now go back to where we want to start from the beginning.
Well, the reason why I brought all that up.
Fantastic preview, because I think it was, and you really put some bookends there. Go ahead.
But without knowing that, what I'm about to say wouldn't make any sense. Again, slow to harness, quick to ride. That's Russia. Now, I don't want Russians to get mad at me. I'm just quoting an old Russian proverb. But Russia has been struggling to get into the harness. And one of the key aspects of getting in the harness, it's several. One is to build the military capacity to accomplish this. Russia didn't have the military. I mean, I think every military analyst, including myself, is going, why are they entering such a big military problem with a peacetime military, force? Why didn't you mobilize the reserves early on, et cetera? And we now know the answer. Naive, totally naive. Slow to harness. They mobilized 300,000 reservists. In addition to that, there's ongoing recruitment. So the number is actually considerably larger than 300,000. There's 120,000 volunteers that have been mobilized during this period of time as well. In a sports analogy, when a team is preparing for a championship match, or when an athlete's preparing for the Olympics, talk to any Olympic athlete about their training plan, their regimen. They want peak performance to come time of the match. All right? Keep that in mind, because the military is the same way. You aren't going to mobilize, train, equip, and bring together this force, because the peak performance moment for the Russians is when that last battalion tactical group comes out of the training ground and arrives in the special military operation, falls in on its equipment, has the fuel, the ammunition all lined up. That's the moment when they have to be used. Because if you don't use them, if you instead sit them back, idle their engines, combat efficiency drops. And so in a very short period of time, that final BTG is going to arrive from the final training ground, wherever they are in Russia right now. And when they arrive, the Russians have had a long time. They're not surprised by any of this. They've been planning for this. They know when that unit arrives. They know what logistically has to be done to prepare for that. And they know what they want to accomplish with it. We are talking 10 to 15 division equivalents. The Russians have solidified the defensive line. It ain't going nowhere. They're continuing offensive operations in the Bakhmut area and other areas, grinding away. 10 to 15 division equivalents are about to arrive on the battlefield, equipped with the most modern equipment the Russian defense industry can give them. And when they do, they're going to be unleashed. And as General Zaluzhny said, we don't have anything to stop them. This war, gentlemen, is over. And the West knows it. There's not a single military analyst out there worth their salt who can speak unencumbered, because many of them are prisoners to their contracts with MSNBC, CNN, et cetera. So they have to spout the thing. But even then, they're starting to lose the narrative, because they're just in there going, there ain't nothing Ukraine can do. There's literally nothing Ukraine can do. This is over. And that's the important thing. The West still labors under the belief that there can be a negotiated settlement. And so now, George, I come to answer your question. I told you it takes me a little while to get there, but
you're like
Zelensky,
the Russians. Okay.
Slow to harness, baby, but quick to ride. Zelensky isn't dim. Zelensky wants to continue the fight, because that's the only thing that keeps Zelensky politically viable.
And maybe
at some point, well, we'll see. I mean, I personally believe that if Zelensky doesn't take the ride that he never really denied wanting, but at some point in time, he's going to be offered the ride. And if he refuses the ride, then I think he's going to die. And it isn't going to be the West killing him. It's going to be his own military, because they hate him. He's turning into a hateful figure. He's despised. The troops despise him. If you take him and instead of taking him to a hand-picked group of ultra-nationalists, which they did in the so-called Bakhmut visit, he takes him to the unit that just suffered 90% casualties, puts Zelensky, and he'll shoot him on the spot. They'll shoot him on the spot.
So why don't the Americans then push? If they really want a negotiated outcome, why don't they push for it? After all, as you said, Zelensky is a tool of the Americans. I mean, so he'll have to do as he's told. I mean, if Biden tells him the jig's up, then the jig's up. So why don't the Americans push for something? And the Russians would be very welcoming to any American initiatives, but there haven't been any American.
Well,
it would only have to come from Washington.
It has to come from Washington.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I disagree. I don't think Russia will take any initiative. I think it's over for diplomacy. I think the day of diplomacy is finished. I think the Russians are committed to a path of measured military advances. There will come a moment, and I think the United States knows this. I'll call it the Odessa moment. Prior to the Odessa moment, Russia is there's things that cannot be stopped with diplomacy. The first thing that can't be stopped is that Russia is going to reconquer every piece of territory that belongs to it under Article 64 of the Russian Constitution. I think I got the article right. But this newly acquired territory, there's significant parts of it that are still occupied by Ukraine. That is Mother Russia. It's never going to belong to Ukraine. And so when people say, what is Russia going to do offensively? I just told you what Russia is going to do offensively. They're going to liberate Mother Russia. And the liberation of Mother Russia isn't just the reacquisition or the acquisition of this territory. It's going to push the Ukrainians back, so never again can an M777 howitzer fire a round that lands on Mother Russia. They are going to be pushed back to a sufficient range outside of artillery range. This will probably require Russia in the north to take Kharkov and expand out. So I think Ukraine is going to lose yet another province. They're going to lose Kharkov. They may lose more. They may lose Sumy. I don't know. I'm not a Russian planner. But I think the major action is going to be fought in the north and in the center, pushing the Ukrainians back. This is going to be done decisively, but in a measured fashion. Why? Because what I get in talking to Russian officials is that one of the things the Russians have been doing from the very beginning is escalation management. The Russians don't want to win too fast, too quick. They don't want to shock NATO to the point that NATO does something precipitously, or a NATO member does something precipitously, such as Poland moving into Western Ukraine or Romania working with Moldova to attack Transnistria. These are two potential flashpoints that the Russians don't want to flash. And the way you don't let them flash is through measured success on the battlefield. Success that becomes inevitable, unstoppable. And now we come to what I call, and I think this is going to be reached sometime in the late spring, early summer. I call it the Odessa moment. Russia will have done everything I just said, and there's nothing Ukraine can do. nothing Ukraine or the West can do to stop. Now we come to the Odessa moment, because this becomes a risky time for Russia, because I think they can do everything I just said without any risk. Now the Odessa moment is when they're going to burst out of the Kherson bridgehead, and they're going to make a drive towards Transnistria. But before that happens, and again, I'm guided by Putin. Strange that I would be guided by. I'm Putin's puppet, so I guess I have to be guided by him. But it was an answer he gave to a question at a Valdai meeting from a Hungarian journalist about Odessa, and he gave a response that was cryptic. But the general gist of the response was that Odessa can either be the point that creates peace or the point that terminates the conflict violently, meaning that. And this is where diplomacy comes in, George. This is what I call the American moment. Everybody knows that if you deny Ukraine access to the sea, it's dead as a nation. It'll be nothing more than an agrarian rump state, very difficult to sustain. And it's a problem for both Russia, and this is why it's so important. It's a problem for Russia and the West. This is why the Odessa moment is so critical, because Russia doesn't want Ukraine to be a dead nation.
That's right.
They don't want that. They don't. It's not good for Russia. But Russia also needs to protect its interests. So the Odessa moment will be that time for a diplomatic solution that allows Ukraine continued access to the sea, allows Ukraine. And Ukraine's making it tougher and tougher, taking down Catherine the Great statue, taking down all the statues. It's like, hey, go ahead and kill us. Why not? We're going to, as opposed to saying, no, we're going to respect the heritage of Odessa so that we can live in peace and prosperity with our, but the Russians have never taken the bait. Anytime anything stupid like this happens, including what happened in the disaster that happened in the School 19. Everybody's like, oh, Russia's going to respond. No, they're not. That's war, baby. You lost 96 guys. Get over it. The same day they lost 96 guys, they took out a ice skating rink. Where the Ukrainians lost hundreds of guys, including a HIMARS system, 2 Vampire systems, and some artillery systems. So it's called war. If you give the enemy a target, the enemy's going to hit the target. And shame on the Russian leadership that didn't predict this.
People are saying here. That's what people are saying.
But also say this. I mean, I don't want to deviate too much, but this is a story that was driven by a certain class of Russian blogger, I'll call it. And it's a class that seems to be dominated by people who fought in the Donbass in the early stages of the conflict. It was what I call the
this guy Igor Strelkov.
Yeah, a bunch of egomaniacs who went in there early when it was the Wild West, ran their own little fiefdoms, did their own thing. Some of it legal, a lot of it illegal, a lot of it criminal. And as the war matured and adults came in and took over control because it became a long-term conflict that has sustainability issues attached to it. These people like Strelkov and others got pushed out. And since then, they've been very bitter, very angry. They're very anti-Putin. They're very anti-Russia. They claim to be part of this greater Russian empire thing. I don't know what but these guys hate Putin. They hate Russia. And in many cases, I don't know what they're trying to accomplish, because they seem to be literally tools of Ukrainian propaganda. And what you saw with this, the story, 600 dead. Putin should be shot. They should hang this man by his entrails on the thing. I mean, this story was ginned up by these people. It's a tragedy. There's Russian families right now who have lost fathers, lost husbands, lost sons. I mean, my God, if you don't cry when you think about this, you don't cry when you think about what's happening to Ukrainians, except for the Nazis. I never cried. But for the average Ukrainian, man, you've got to break down in tears what's happening. This is just one of the.
Let's flesh this out. I'm very much intrigued by what you're saying here, this Odessa moment. So,
yeah,
are you saying that Russia would be amenable to, under certain circumstances, allowing Odessa to remain part of Ukraine as an outlet onto the sea? Are you suggesting that could be part of a settlement that Russia could buy into?
I'm suggesting that Putin suggested it.
Okay.
And when we think of diplomacy, understand this, there's no diplomatic intervention that can occur that's going to stop Russia from doing everything up to the Odessa moment. That is going to happen.
But you are very well aware that Odessa is a very, very delicate sore point with a lot of people in Eastern Ukraine and in Russia because of the trade union massacre. Okay.
Absolutely.
There are people that want, it hasn't been that long. These people are still alive. They want accountability. I want to see a trial. It was all videotaped. We know exactly who did it. Okay.
Yeah. I'm not a Russian negotiator. All right. If I were, part of my deal would be accountability.
But you might, you're absolutely right. I live here. I work with these people every single day for a quarter century. They are very reasonable people at the end of the day. If they're actually very, very pragmatic. I've met very few fanatics here, to be honest with you. But my big question is